Miss Sigmund, and I'm so glad to be back with Stencil Girl today, sharing 2 new 9x12 stencils. And I'm really excited about these. I'm going to be doing some fun stuff with these in the future with stitching and mixed media. But today I wanted to share the simple ways you can just actually stencil through them with 3 different mediums. And this time of year, I do a lot of snail mail and letter writing. As the fall approaches, I really like that task and hobby. And so we're going to incorporate some of the things we make today in some fun stationery pieces. Okay, before we get started, I just want to do a really quick recap on how you can get some mediums through the stencil. I won't do both stencils just because you've probably seen it a million times, but I'll show you what my method is for each of the 3 mediums that I'll be using today. I'm going to start with the acrylic. So I have some acrylic paint on my palette. I would consider it a heavy body. I use fluid and craft paint as well, but this is heavy body. I've kind of moved it out and thinned it out a bit, and I'm just going to choose an area and show you that I would, even though my stencil is taped down, I would still kind of hold it a little bit around the stencil opening. So, and I would just up and down tap so that everything stays between the openings of the stencil and you don't have any movement sliding under there. And if you want to add depth or color anywhere, you can come back over it with more paint. And we'll do a reveal on that in a minute. So I would typically let it sit just while I finish the stencil and then carefully pull it up. So the second thing that I want to show you is an ink pad. I just happen to have these Distress Oxide ink pads. You could do this with another ink pad as well. I also have a blending brush, and I'm kind of just moving it along the ink pad to get some ink on there. And again, I would hold the stencil down wherever I'm going to stencil, even though it's taped, and I would kind of push down. If your stencil's very adhered to the paper, if you've got a nice clean opening like this, a big opening, and you're able to get the stencil to lay very flat, you can use a little motion when you're putting the ink on, but it's best to kind of push the ink pad down, keep it in one spot, and move the ink a little rather than running it back and forth like this. So I'm just going to do this little spot as well. And again, we'll let it dry while we use our third medium, which is watercolor. And for watercolor, I just want to have a small amount of water with a heavier load of pigment on the plate. So I would want it, if it looks very wet, I would continue to add some pigment to get it where it moves like this. And you can see that a little better here. So not flowing around with a lot of water. And the same thing, I would hold the part of the stencil down if it has any lift, and I'm just going to go from side to side. The key is to start on the stencil and end on the stencil. Don't start within that opening, or the paint could go below the surface of the Mylar, and then you end up with it pooling underneath. And with watercolor, you run that risk anyway, but the less water you have, the better. And again, to like start on the Mylar and end on the Mylar. Don't start within the opening of the stencil. If you're moving across like that and you don't see any paint going in there, switch direction. And again, just make sure you're moving across and not scrubbing within those openings. Once you let go of the stencil, your watercolor should remain wherever there is already watercolor or water. So if you get a lot under there, it's going to want to move under there. So let's do one more watercolor one. So you can see I've used up a lot of that ink, or paint rather. So I'll put a little bit on there. If I need water, I'm barely touching the tip of my brush in the water to add a little there. And we'll do these here. So I'm going to go across, make sure it's pushed down. They do have things like pixie spray that you can spray on your stencil to get it to adhere to the paper and then pull off. It does leave a little bit of tack on your stencil. It's not hard to clean or anything. I've just never gotten used to using it, so I don't pull it out very often. Now, because I do have watercolor on the stencil, I would let it sit for maybe a minute before I pull it all up. And then I would clean the stencil right away before I touch anything on my sheet of paper. Okay, so it's been about 45 seconds or so, so I'm going to go ahead and remove my stencil. If you're using tape on your stencil, it's always nice to use an artist tape or a washi tape so it doesn't tear the paper below. And you'll want to remove that tape at an angle, like you're pulling it off at a 90-degree angle, and that helps with it not tearing as well. And you can kind of hold your stencil down as you go if you need to. Slow is better when you're removing the tape. And then once that is done, it's nice to have, I find that the 9x12 stencils are a little bit harder to pick up without moving the medium that's on top of them because they're big. So if you have a tweezer or something that you can kind of grab one end with and slowly pull it up, mostly for the watercolor areas, it's really helpful. Then I would set that aside and let that, get that cleaned right away. But you can see the ink and the acrylic, perfect, crisp. The watercolor is pretty crisp. This was a big opening, and I would consider this a good watercolor impression from the stencil, but I could use a little less water next time. Now, this doesn't bother me because almost always when I use watercolor through stencils, I add some kind of continuous line work mixed in with that and some hand drawing or some additional stenciling where I piece it together with other parts like the flowers. So a lot of that goes unnoticed. So let me give you a little bit closer look. So you can see this was the ink pad. It's so crisp and lovely, and so is the acrylic with the sponge. And for watercolor, this is actually really nice considering I'm not even working on watercolor paper. This is Bristol paper. So I hope that helps. And now let's explore what the stencils are, how I was inspired by them, and our project. So the first stencil I want to share with you is this Wild Fruit and Petals stencil. And here is an image of it where I've already used paint through it. And this is a printout of what it looks like with watercolor through it. So I actually watercolored on a larger piece and printed this out. I use these a lot for collage pieces and background pages, end papers and journals, that sort of thing. But it gives you an idea of what it looks like with a loose medium through it, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a while. I love this collection. It was definitely inspired by that untamed sort of elegance that nature has when it's in bloom. So it features a lot of loose, expressive shapes of garden petals and those wild foraged berries and things that I can collect around me and then study and paint and draw from. And I love that it's sort of evokes that sense of seasonal abundance. So it's a perfect time of year for that, where we're collecting and curating and creating. And so that seasonal abundance comes into play. I plan on using it for a lot of like faded florals and little juicy clusters of things. And a lot of the leaves have curling edges, things that we can cut and paste in collage like we're so used to in mixed media. And so I love that it's going to add a touch of that wild romance to your pages or your collage work or whatever you're working on. So this is the wild fruit and petal. And I'm going to show you a couple other pieces that were done with different mediums using this stencil. So the first piece is done with a stencil and just acrylic paint on an artist sponge. You can use a traditional artist sponge, or I buy in bulk these inexpensive, budget-friendly makeup wedges. And these are great for acrylic paint, putting it on the palette and kind of pouncing it around. And you can really move that paint out to the thickness and viscosity that you like for stenciling. If you want a very clean read, you'll want to use a minimal amount of paint. If you want something thicker and juicier, you can add more paint to the sponge. The bonus is that when these dry, you can trim them with scissors and you can keep using them down. You can also cut them down to smaller pieces. If I really just want to get a very fine area, I could cut this out to a more detailed size sponge. So this is acrylic paint, and you can see it's a beautiful clean read through the stencil, especially considering how delicate and detailed this stencil is. The second example is done with watercolor, and I have used a flat wash brush. This is a half inch flat wash brush, and I'll show you. The read on this is pretty good. There are a few places where it looks like my paint may have come under the stencil just a tad, but for the most part, I think it's a beautiful read for using such a wet medium like watercolor. And the way to do that is you want to be pigment heavy and water light. So on your palette, you'll want a lot of pigment, and you're just adding in micro amounts of water, enough to move that around. And then when your stencil is in place, you're just holding that down and moving across the top of it, or from side to side. You're not scrubbing it into the holes. If you're doing this, you run the risk of it moving up under that stencil, and you'll get that shadow effect or that bleed under the stencil. But if you're moving from side to side and holding your brush pretty horizontal, you're going to get a nice read. And again, the more water you use, the bigger chance you have of kind of moving that medium under the stencil, which I don't hate. But to show you how clean of a read you can get, that's what you would do. So that is with watercolor. And then I scanned in a picture of this and printed it. And so you can see I can manipulate the size of the stencil that way and have it for different bits and pieces in my journal. The last example is using a distress ink pad. You could use any kind of ink pad. I used this little handy dandy tool to dip into the ink pad and move around the stencil. Again, being cautious to run this way and not scrubbing it underneath the stencil edge. And it works great. You can see I got a beautiful clean read with the stencil using the ink pad and the juicy distress ink. So I really like that. So let me introduce you to the second stencil. This is the second stencil. This is Heirloom Leaves and Pods. I love this one. There's lots of bits and pieces that you can manipulate and move around and combine on this one. Here's the example of the printout in the watercolor. Again, a nice read on that very busy and intricate stencil. I love this collection too. It was inspired again by a lot of what's out there in nature, but mostly that kind of time-worn foliage and seed pods, like things as they're on their way out a little bit. And I love that, where the leaves aren't so fresh and perky, but they're beginning to curl on the edges, and the petals are beginning to move around and open up on the flowers. And I love that. This stencil definitely captures that beauty of nature's kind of evolving and enduring shapes. And I love that. Each of these element kind of feels like a pressed piece that I would have in my collection, or something that I would put in my vintage botanical journal. They're delicate and organic and hold lots and lots of details. So they're perfect for layering in our journals and our mixed media pieces. And I love that there's so many different botanical elements to this that I could combine not only with this stencil, but with the other stencil in this series. And it sort of brings that natural rhythm to your creative work when you're piecing things together that are similar but not identical. So I really love this piece. So I'm just going to walk you through again the same thing. This is the example of me using the stencil with just acrylic paint and that artist sponge. The next example is watercolor again. And I love, for as much detail as is in this stencil, how nice and clean that paint came through. I really love that. That was using the 1/2" wash brush again. And then lastly, again, with the ink pad and the ink brush there, and a really nice, crisp read on all of these beautiful stencil openings. So let's talk about what we can make with these stencils. Okay, so to begin the project, we're going to talk about getting our stenciled work onto something else that we can incorporate into our stationery. So the first thing I did, and you can use any of the forms that you like or mediums that you like when you're stenciling, is I did a watercolor image, which I've already shared with you, on large sheets of Bristol paper. And this took the watercolor well. It didn't allow it to move as much as it would on watercolor paper because it quickly absorbed a lot of that moisture and water. So I didn't get a lot of the running that I would if I would have used watercolor paper, which would be gorgeous on its own. But for this, I really wanted something a little more crisp, but also the dreamy look of the watercolor. So I have stenciled both of my new stencils on Bristol paper with watercolor. Then I've taken a nice image of them. You could either photograph them and edit them. You can use a scanning app or your printer. I have an app that I use that's directly connected to my printer. We won't get into the technicalities of that because I couldn't possibly begin to explain all the different versions of them out there, but I take a picture with my phone and it goes to my printer and I can manipulate it and print it. But I like to print them on sticker paper. So there are white sticker papers, there's clear sticker papers, there's a lots of things out there. If you can see in the lighting here, this is a clear sticker paper. And I have taken the same image and just printed it on the sticker paper. Now to create the background of our stationery, we're going to be using some fun journal papers. You can use whatever you have. I have this tablet that looks like kind of time-worn paper. It has some numbers and quotes and stuff on it. And I'm going to be painting some backgrounds with watercolor like this. Nothing fancy, super loose. It's not watercolor paper. It's going to crinkle and make some noise. It's going to bleed and react very non-traditionally to watercolor paper. So use whatever you're comfortable with. And then we're going to cut these out and add them onto these to create some snail mail with. Okay, so I have a watercolor palette. I have a couple different brushes. I have that 1/2 inch wash. I have a number 4 round, and then I have this teeny tiny detail brush. It doesn't even have a number on it. It just came in a little set, I think. And you can choose to wet your paper first. I'm going to. I know it's not a watercolor paper, so my paints are going to react differently, and I'm okay with that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and start adding some color to the page to create sort of a frame around what goes. And sometimes these frames will morph into a full page of color, and sometimes I'll leave them. You can use your stencils to inspire you to paint something that kind of coordinates with what you've stenciled, or you can just add those in as a little element afterwards and kind of paint whatever you want here. I do it super quick. I'm not giving it much thought. They dry pretty quickly, even on the non-traditional paper. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of, that was like an ochre yellow. This is kind of a greenish yellow. And a yellow green, just to add a little bit of green in a couple of these corners. And this is where I find that I sort of that color begins to move out and around, and I'm okay with that. And then I might switch to this small brush and just come in and maybe do a few little vines or leaves. Now remember, I'm working with the wild fruit and petals and the heirloom leaves and pods, so I'm gonna probably keep my stationery somewhat botanically themed. That doesn't mean you have to. That's just what I'm gonna do for today. And you can see the paint is moving differently than it would on watercolor paper, but it's giving me some interesting results, especially where I've kind of pre-sprayed that paper. And then I'm going to come up here and do the same, kind of taking some notes and inspiration from the stencil itself. So if you have the stencil or something nearby that represents the stencil, like maybe the printout or something, these make great inspiration for what you're drawing or painting on your stationery pieces. And then depending on if you printed stickers or collage pieces to add in here, you can pull from those to get a little bit of color or something that might coordinate a little bit with that. Not too much thought process or detail going into these. Just, I wanted them to be very whimsical and dreamy. And so I will probably leave it here and let it dry, other than maybe tapping off my brush in another color to give it a few little drips of color. And I'm just adding a little bit of gold in there to move around that purple. Now you can see there's a lot of water on this and a lot of pigment, and that's okay. I would set that aside to dry before I would come back and work with any of my collage or sticker elements. So my piece is mostly dry. I love how the watercolor dried in juicy little areas there. So now while that is finishing, it's just damp in a few places, let's go ahead and paint an envelope to go with it. You could use any kind of envelope. These are some I have on hand. I might actually paint on the craft because that's going to give me a little bit of a different look with the watercolor. And let's see how that goes. So again, I'm going to start by just spraying the envelope with a little bit of water and bringing in some of the same colors that I used on the stationery. And if you're worried about the medium getting wet in the post or anything like that, you definitely could switch to an acrylic or something. A lot of the pieces that I do are for people that are local, so I can hand deliver them. And I mail the ones with watercolor all the time, and I haven't had any problems. So I'm just going to do something that kind of coordinates with our piece of stationery a little bit, leaving room, of course, for my address and whatnot. You can see how quickly I'm doing this. I'm not spending a great deal of time on it. I want it to be loose and artsy. So I like that. I'm gonna let that dry and then we'll meet back here. Now that my stationery is completely dry, I've gone ahead and cut out some of the stickers. And just as reference, these are the images for the 2 stencils. So I have cut some from the Heirloom leaves and pods, and then I've cut some from the wild fruits and petals, just so we can see what those might look like on the stationery. And then it's just a matter of auditioning them to see where you might want them to be. So I'm just going to kind of play around with these a little bit. Something to note, the clear stickers, they will look white when you are kind of auditioning them for certain places, but that white paper will be gone. So it will be a clear sticker. So it's a little bit harder to determine where you might want things, but if that helps out at all, it does show you that there's a clearness to it. And I'll do one as an example. So this is a little piece of flower, and you can see the difference there from when it had the white paper backing on it. So I'm gonna add something else to this one. Maybe I'll go ahead and do one of these little leaves. And if it helps, you can use little tweezers to help you lay them down, because you can kind of hold it up a little and see where it might go or where it might look nice before you lay it down. And the nice part about the clear stickers too is they're gonna allow you to see the colors that are beneath them when you're layering them like that. So I'm gonna set that aside for a moment and see. I really wanna use one of these little seed pods. I think if I extend the branch using this leaf, I might be able to factor that in. So I'm gonna bring this down. See how nice they look when they're clear? I just love that. And then I should be able to bring some of the seed pods in. I really want to use these. I like this. And maybe they'll end up looking more like a flower, but that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put a couple of these on the envelope. I'm going to bring in another color now, these little ones. Typically these clear, they're full-size sheet stickers, and they are typically easy to peel. So, and again, you can see how nicely they layer, and you can see those colors. For another little pop of brown, I like that. And then you could even come back to your sticker sheets if you are like me. I don't cut them all out at once, and you could just find something else that you might use. Now, a perfect example of using them in part is, I love this and I think it would look great up here, but it's too big. So maybe I would just cut part of this leaf out and use it. Maybe I'll just come in here and have it come off of that edge. And that's a little bit darker green. It kind of moves everything to the center where they're meeting, and I like that because then I can write my letter in this area here. And it looks pretty cool too because it's all a little bit more artistic than a typical letter. I think I am going to take this seed pod and just put it in a little spot by itself, maybe down here in the corner. And then I have some of each. And I love that. I think the biggest takeaway for me would be this. So you start by stenciling something, and you have this amazing image you can use for anything. Cut it apart, save it, frame it, do whatever. And then you have the ability to manipulate color and size and create further elements of collage paper. You can create stickers and things that are easy to adhere into your book, and then cut them apart, and you have all these perfect travel size pieces. And then finally you have ways to add them into your projects. So your stencils can be found in so many places and used in so many ways. And they're workhorses. You can use them over and over for things, whether it's from the art to the collage to the cut and paste to the sticker and right into your project. So I hope you enjoyed making some fun stationery with me. It is always the season of abundance around here when it comes to stencils. I love them, and I hope you enjoy the new wild fruit and petals and heirloom leaves and pods as much as I do, and I can't wait to see what you create with them. So have fun and be sure to tag me so I can see what you're making. Happy creating.